When I first played Darksiders back on the PS3, I can't ever remember actually finishing it. It's always been on my radar to go back and revisit, so I could fully understand the cult following it's gathered over the years. Every once in a while, I'd always notice another video essay that popped up regarding this franchise, as the art style alone was instantly recognisable, and I always felt compelled to dive back into it, to finally finish the journey that I started. So after shelving the many other games I'm currently trying to tackle, I decided it was finally time to walk War's path. Join me as we read through the pixels of Darksiders. We begin with a brief comic strip style intro, giving us the setup and lore of this world and how it came to be. Biblical themes are interwoven throughout, with angels, demons, heaven and hell, alongside Adam and Eve and the kingdom of man, all living in balance with one another, even if we ourselves, meaning humans on Earth, aren't aware of the other forces at play, with the four horsemen ready to enforce if the scales are tipped one way or the other. It's an interesting premise for sure, as we cut to a pre-rendered cutscene of our very own Earth. As meteors start to rain down, we are shown these are actually caused from great battles between angels and demons at the centre of each. I love the idea that these creatures are so powerful that when they clash it would create such cosmic levels of chaos that us mere humans would only observe what resembles meteorites heading for Earth as the apocalypse begins. It's here we are first introduced to War, our protagonist for this adventure. I love how he rises so imposingly, sword in hand, even when the enemies he's facing are far bigger and menacing, like nothing will stand in his way to enforce the Council's will. We're introduced to combat here to give us a taste of part of the gameplay loop, as the hulking beast that was introduced in the opening cinematic is made short work of when War uses his Chaos form, representing a fiery demonic entity that destroys everything in its path, which we'll come back to later. We see angels joining the battle, remarking that judgment approaches, like they know this will be the decider of the fate of their existence. We make short work of them when a mysterious horn is blown. War isn't sure what's happening as we seem to lose some of our power, but we must continue regardless. I like how we get to see pedestrians still roaming the streets. Seeing the complete anarchy makes you wonder how you'd even comprehend what's happening in this situation. I've always enjoyed seeing the world around me actively carrying on in games, as angels and demons continue to battle each other, and we're just in the centre of it all, with Earth already resembling a complete hellscape, with demonic spires jutting out everywhere, buildings collapsing, and meteors continuing to fall. One of the four, but where are his brothers? Dialogue like this makes us realise something isn't quite right. Our enemies know who we are and why we're here, yet something is amiss. We'll get to the designs of all the characters and creatures a bit later, as even though Darksiders is over a decade old at this point, and it might be showing its age a little bit, it's testament that art style can age far more gracefully than realism will. I'll just touch on the designs of the angels being a sort of mythical yet mechanical hybrid, clad in fancy metal armour but with organic wings. The whole game just oozes style throughout, and I can't wait to talk about it. We're introduced to a few other characters, Abaddon being one of them, who himself looks imposing even next to War, remarking that the final seal was not broken, so it's impossible for War to be here. Abaddon and another angel commander, Uriel, continue to fight off the demon hordes, as we again hear the mysterious horn blown as War wonders where the other horsemen are, dropping to his knees as though his powers are failing him. Abaddon again remarks the seventh seal was not broken, expressing frustration that War has arrived, as a large demon hand erupts out of the lava below, crushing Abaddon easily, as Uriel looks on, scolding War and blaming him for the death of her lord. But all War did was answer the call to arms that he swore to, so already it seems like nobody knows what the hell is happening. We then have our first boss fight, which is pretty simple as we learn more basic mechanics which we'll use throughout the rest of the game. We weaken the hulking demon and go to finish the killing blow, only for the horn to be blown once again, weakening us and stopping us dead. As we fight with all the strength that we have left, we eventually succumb to the demon's crushing force. War awakens and finds himself at the foot of the Charred Council, as these godlike entities restate the law that was established. War is adamant that he was summoned and is convinced Abaddon knew something about what happened to the seals. Being determined to prove his innocence, he strikes a deal with the council, to return to Earth and find out what truly happened so he can clear his name. They do agree to this on the condition that he is bound to a watcher, so the council can see and hear his every move.
Remember that, or I will really get under your skin.
With the watcher in hand, the first task we are given is to find the demon Vulgrim and find our way from there, as we are exiled to carry out our duty.
Looks like our trajectory was a little off. Not so fast, horseman.
So that's the main setup, as we arrive on Earth and introduce ourselves to the fodder enemies by quickly taking care of them. We learn that War had been imprisoned by the council for his supposed crimes for around a century, as we see a dead, ruined landscape ahead of us, with the Destroyer's armies having taken over after War's defeat. Vulgrim then makes his acquaintance.
Subtle. I almost didn't hear you coming.
Vulgrim.
The council finally took me seriously. If so, you're surely not empty-handed. This shall be the briefest of introductions.
I love Vulgrim. He's quite cocky towards War in the beginning, probably because he knows that War needs his help to progress, as he tasks us with collecting more souls for him, which will be our primary currency throughout our adventure, to trade for abilities and items. I enjoy when games add a variation to the standard money or gold that we usually collect, as I feel like it helps to build on the lore and immerse us into the game's world. Plus, reaping your enemy's souls as you kill them is just pretty cool, let's face it. Cool being a word I'll try not to use too much as we talk about Darksiders, even though I feel like the whole game has so much style to it, which I'll get more into once we've established the bulk of what we'll be doing throughout our adventure. Vulgrim becomes our merchant and our fast travel point for the game, and becomes a character that we'll frequently encounter throughout each game in the series. He adds a bit of comedic relief to the game when I think about him being a lowly demon that nobody took any notice of before now, but he finally gets his chance and thoroughly exploits it. The fact that War, one of the legendary Four Horsemen, has to entertain him and put up with him. In any case, we continue on, as Vulgrim points us in the direction of another demon known as Samael, who can help us reach the Destroyer's Tower, which brings us closer to our goal. We have to free Samael from his eternal prison after he was exiled due to opposing the rule of the Destroyer. This presents him as not necessarily completely evil, which we would generally assume all demons to be. Same with Vulgrim really, who does provide us with means to further our quest, but we'll get more into that later on in the video. Samael explains to us that to reach the Destroyer's Tower, we must kill 4 guardians that protect it, with the first one being Tiamat at the Twilight Cathedral. So we now have our heading, which sets up the general structure for the rest of the game. Darksiders takes us to many locations as we begin to hunt down the hearts of the Chosen, with each guardian having its own unique area and dungeon to complete, where we'll be completing various combat challenges, puzzles and some light platforming sections, which make up the general gameplay loop. It's a basic premise, but I think that's part of the appeal for me. It's just an old school game with no added frills that it doesn't need, as a lot of modern games have so many mechanics to contend with, which can often feel a bit messy and disjointed, usually to pad out runtime and try to keep the player engaged, but I find it can often have the opposite effect. Darksiders has a Metroidvania style of progression, with some areas being closed off to us in each dungeon until we get the equipment required to access them, generally leading to more collectibles to upgrade our character as we continue to fight tougher enemies. Before we set off to the Twilight Cathedral though, Samael grants us the Shadow Flight ability, allowing us to glide for a short distance to help with traversal, but for now, let's focus on combat. With combat being a large portion of the game, you need to have a good variety of combos, weapons and abilities we can use to keep us interested throughout, which I would say Darksiders achieves for the most part. War's main weapon of choice is his Chaos Eater, which feels pretty good to use with decent feedback of weight to each swing and slash as it hits enemies, sometimes sending them flying as the sword connects. We have a range of basic combos which are simple enough to execute, not being overly complex so we can perform them reliably and effectively, unlike me when it comes to Devil May Cry, which goes for the combat difficulty in general, being fairly straightforward. I played the game on apocalyptic difficulty, which I guess is classed as hard mode, and at first the main issue was more the damage I was receiving, killing me in only a few hits, but once I started to level up and gain more health, I'd say it became pretty easy to mow down waves of enemies using the Chaos Eater. Even when we do acquire new weapons, I felt like this was still the go-to, as it just seemed to fit War's character more, with each horseman having their own iconic weapon. We also have various abilities that we can use that aid us in combat. The first one we obtain is a Blade Geyser attack, which summons blades around our immediate area, and we can buy more from Vulgrim as we get further into the game. I didn't really use these all that often, as I forgot about them most of the time, sometimes accidentally pressing the button and realising that they were still there. I probably use Stone Skin the most often, as it helps to reduce damage taken from enemies and also increases damage dealt. I do like the various effects they have on War's look though. We can also pick up and throw items from the environment, which I only really did to work towards one of the trophies. Saying that though, I don't know why I find such a simple mechanic so satisfying, but being able to launch items from the environment like these cars at basically Mach 2 towards enemies never gets old, as War seems to barely use any power in his throw, yet it catapults with so much force. Chaos Foam just felt like the get out of jail free card to play whenever I was overwhelmed. Although the 3-hit combo wasn't really that satisfying to use compared with the rest of War's arsenal. It felt mega slow and sluggish, but then perhaps it was meant to. I do love the design though, a hulking fiery demon, often towering over other enemies. Like War isn't already powerful enough, he has an unstoppable form he can call on to lay waste to anyone in his way. The Chaos Eater's design of various screaming maws and skulls along the blade, and just the name of it alone, set up the sheer violence and pain that this weapon inflicts upon the unfortunate souls who come into contact with it, whether angel, demon, or mortal. Our weapons will gain experience naturally as we use them, which increases their overall damage, but we can also imbue them with various enhancements, with each one slightly altering the look of it too. Which is a nice little touch that I've always loved in games, seeing your weapons change as they become more powerful or we slot things into them. There are also legendary enhancements to find that correspond to each one of the 4 horsemen's strengths. War's Glory giving the blade a red tinge, blood dripping from the blade and pouring from the engraved mouths. Death's Blessing allows us to reap more soul rewards from enemies. I love the effect of ghostly apparitions of souls leaving the blade, with this being particularly suited to Death's weapon of choice, the Scythe, a weapon we can acquire from Vulgrim, which is more of a crowd control weapon with sweeping area of effect combos. I quite enjoyed using this to mix up the combat a bit when the Chaos Eater just wasn't quite cutting it. We also gained a Tremor Gauntlet later on, which I did use more often than I thought I would, as it does hit like a train, pushing enemies away to give us a bit of breathing room when needed, and just switched up the variety a little. These will be our 3 main weapons, along with a few various secondaries which I didn't use all that often other than when I needed to, but we'll touch more on those a bit later. To arrive at the Twilight Cathedral, our first main dungeon, we have to commandeer an angelic beast, throwing us into an on-rail shooting section, which is generally a staple in many games to mix things up from the norm. When we clear this section and reach the Twilight Grounds, Tiamat, the First Guardian, intercepts us, knocking us from our mount and leaving us to navigate the many hallways of this grand cathedral. I'll not tread through every intricacy of these dungeons, as we have 3 modes to contend with after this one, before the plot moves forward and any more story is revealed to us. As mentioned, we do have a few puzzles to contend with along the way, which switch up the pace a bit and give you a breather between combat sections. Throughout the game we'll gain various new tools, which will all come into play as we need them. Here we gain the crossblade, which can hit far off switches and ignite dormant bombs around the area to blow open new pathways. It can also be used in combat, but I never really felt the need to, other than the boss fight with Tiamat at the end of this level. None of the puzzles were too challenging, but some had me pause for a second, having to actively think about how I needed to approach them. It gets more complex the more elements are added to the puzzles. The most interesting sections for me were later on in the game when we had to utilise the Void Walker, creating an entry and exit portal at specific points in the level, sometimes having to charge each one to alter our velocity and reach certain sections that would otherwise be inaccessible. It's nothing particularly original, but its inclusion here was a welcome addition, along with a few of the traversal mechanics, which are your basic grapple points, air currents for extending shadow flight, and your standard box moving platform sections. Eventually, we reach Tiamat, our first major boss fight.
Has the council reduced the horsemen to common assassins? Has Samael bought your loyalty? Because if you offer Sail Rider, perhaps we can strike a deal.
You won't like my terms.
Having to utilise what we've learnt throughout exploration of the dungeon, throwing bombs and igniting them with the crossblade to ground her so we can get a few hits in. Rinse and repeat. I do love the force at which War knocks her flying though when she charges at us, and the final execution being particularly brutal, emphasising his pure strength and the wrath that these horsemen possess, needed to take down all manner of creature when they have to. We take her heart as the Watcher hovers over our shoulder, taunting us constantly to do as we're told. As we leave the cathedral, Vulgrim makes his appearance once again, and mocks how we'll get back to Samael due to not having any form of transport back to the main hub. Which I did question myself, as I was always thinking, when do I get my horse? But Vulgrim has a solution, introducing the fast travel system of the game, known as Serpent Holes. I quite like this idea, as it's just a bit more creative than having a static loading screen, and it's also a reminder of how developers had to actively think about how they'd tackle loading times on old hardware, now a thing of the past with modern consoles. After travelling through the Serpent Hole back to the Scalding Gallows, we bring the heart of Tiamat back to Samael as he points us to our next victim, the Griever, an insect-looking thing that makes its home beneath us in an old underground train station and sewer network. But Samael also mentions someone else called Ulthane, one of the old ones, that we must pass to get to it. I love this scene as the Watcher remarks that Samael is already changing the deal, to which Samael responds with this.
Be silent, filth. My business is with the horsemen.
Just swatting him away like an annoying fly buzzing around us. It's here that Samael taunts us to unleash our rage on the Watcher, which in turn unlocks our Chaos Form that we use at the start of the game before our power was stripped from us. With the Watcher now put in his place, we head out to find Ulthane and kill the Griever.
What was that?
The horseman is broken, but there is still much power in him.
Passing through Anvil's Ford, which is a nice change of scenery from the usual dark grime-filled streets and collapsed buildings. When we reach Ulthane, he challenges us to a duel of swords, openly laughing and mocking us as the Chaos Eater isn't doing any damage whatsoever. Bear in mind War's usual strength and power, yet he does basically nothing against Ulthane, with the only answer being our Chaos form that we just acquired as we strike him down. Uriel then enters the fray with her Hellguard, and we have another challenge to see who can earn the most kills of the pigeons, as Ulthane mocks. I do find it quite funny, having Scottish friends myself, that they are always portrayed as the big burly types in games, generally with a sharp wit but also a friendly undertone, which I'll be honest is a pretty accurate representation, as they're often the kindest and funniest people you'll ever meet. In any case, we reach the end of the shooting range and briefly battle with Uriel. As we defeat her for now, the angels retreat. With Ulthane being somewhat impressed, he opens the way to the Griever's Lair, our second dungeon of the game, telling us that if we manage to make it back out alive, Ulthane will believe that we are in fact who we say we are. In the interest of time, because I didn't find this part particularly enjoyable, we carry out the usual loop of things as before, platforming and puzzle solving with combat areas sprinkled throughout. We eventually reach the Griever, which again is a simple boss to deal with. The bosses in Darksiders aren't particularly great, I must admit. They don't really rely on a health bar as such, it's more just carry out the same action, stun the boss, then deal a bit of damage, rinse and repeat a set number of times. They're all very formulaic and easy to tackle, but even so, I quite like that we don't get stuck on them for ages, as it keeps the pace moving along. War runs a train car through this thing's face multiple times to finish it off, and we have our second guardian defeated and another heart in our possession. We emerge from the Griever's Lair and let Ulthane know of our victory by hurling his hammer by his face by mere inches. I love how arrogant War comes across. Being the youngest horseman, I feel like he has such a no fucks given attitude. He fears nothing or nobody, and I fucking love it. Asserting his presence and dominating every scene. Ulthane then presents us with Mercy, one of Strife's pistols, and War delivers my favourite line in the whole game.
Do I look like I'm afraid of death, boy?
It's not death you should fear.
The most in-your-face play on words ever. The confidence War embodies, implying that War himself should be the one to fear, not his brother Death. I love the rivalry presented between the four. They're the most powerful beings in the universe, yet they're still all striving to be the best between each other, the strongest and most feared, wanting to prove who's the ruler, which fits the youngest and least experienced the most, who seems to be constantly overshadowed by his siblings, especially his eldest brother. I already can't wait to get to Darksiders 2, but for now we must finish War's journey, because this is, after all, where it all started. Samael tells us of the next guardian, the Stygian, a giant ashworm being held captive by the demons. But in order to reach it, we must first cross the Ashlands, a barren wasteland of ash that has fallen from the raging wars on Earth. Perfect fertile ground for other ashworms that roam the area, feeding off the death and decay. He gives us the Necromancer, which allows us to slow time and cross the barren wastes without being consumed by the worms, and serves as another item to utilise when it comes to puzzle solving. I really enjoyed this section of the game, as the environment itself just felt less claustrophobic, like we had space to breathe and it wasn't suffocating us. Even if the concept is pretty bleak, a desert of fallen ash after humans have all been wiped out, so their remains are all that's left. The first section of this area is fairly puzzle heavy, as we learn our way around using the Necromancer, to slow time as we trudge through dense patches of ash where the ashworms roam. War will get bogged down as soon as we step foot off solid ground, so without the Necromancer the ashworms would catch up to us. We continue on, having to navigate these large drilling towers with a few guards to deal with here and there. I like that we can actively see the worms roaming the area, a constant reminder not to stray off the beaten path. the anxious feeling as soon as we step off solid ground to cross an open area, only just reaching the other side before the ashworm catches up to us. In any case, we arrive at the Demon's Colosseum and come up against our first mounted enemies. The Demon Riders have far more mobility than we do, as we're always being pretty limited in our movements, having to dodge their charges and hang back to deal damage, which is a tease for what's to come. I must admit, I was starting to wonder when we finally get our own horse. We're meant to be one of the 4 horsemen, yet up to now we've not even had a glimpse of our own steed. I do get why they held back on this though, as we're meant to have lost all of our power, and the dungeons we've been in before now haven't exactly been suited to a horse, being tightly packed interior spaces. But it's now that we come face to face with our next opponent.
Disappoint me, horseman. You look quite small from up here.
You can look me in the eye when I kill you.
Let's see how you fare, horseman, with only 2 legs to carry.
The Demon Champion enters the Colosseum on a flaming red horse. This is our red horse, Ruin, that has been captured by the demon hordes. As they chant for their champion and taunt us, he mocks our height, and War won't forget that when he gets a chance to kill him. We keep our distance and deal damage from afar. I chose to use Mercy here, as I felt like canonically War wouldn't risk harming his own trusty steed by slashing with his sword and would instead focus fire on the rider. We eventually managed to knock the rider off, and I love how even though this fucker has stolen our horse, War has the honour and decency to kick the demon sword over to him so we can face him fairly. Obviously, we do defeat him, War completely humiliating him after he mocked our high early in the battle, cutting off his legs and looking him dead in the eyes as he runs him through with a Chaos Eater. After this, we are treated to another cutscene, which just deserves to be played in full.
What do you think you're doing? That thing's lost its mind. Kill it! Enough, I said. Finish it!
Run. I won't fight you.
You fool! I order you to break that knife!
And if I refuse, you'll kill me. I'll take my chances.
Are you not entertained?
I fucking love this game, man. War would rather die than hurt Ruin. The gladiator reference from the Watcher. All this time we've anticipated this moment, being reunited with our horse. We've earned this moment as we mount up and begin cutting through the mass of demons that are thrown at us. The cavalry has well and truly arrived. With War and Ruin finally reunited, we're now ready to face the Stygian. After escaping the Colosseum grounds, we come up against a lesser ashworm, which serves as a basic tutorial for how we'll need to tackle the Guardian ahead. Firing into the weak spot of its mouth with Mercy, using Ruin's charges to escape its gripping maw when it lunges. I did quite like the inclusion of one of Strife's pistols, because I love a fantasy setting that adds firearms, as these two genres rarely mix. but riding our fiery steed whilst firing away at our pursuers just adds a bit of flair and feels cool as hell. We ride on to reach a large clearing, where our next victim is being held in chains. As we approach and cut down the spectators, the Stygian breaks free, and we have to hit the side of its muzzle to break it off, exposing its mouth for us to deal damage. Another brutal execution later, and we have our third heart ready to take back to Samael. Just one more to go before we can finally reach the Destroyer's tower. Ruin allows us to openly traverse the Ashlands now, which has a few collectibles we can find and mounted enemies to face, but nothing much else to note. I still think it's my favourite area of the game though, as it just lets us stretch our legs a bit and has a calming feel to it. I wish there was a bit more to do here, but for now we'll head back to tell Samael the good news. Each time we kill one of the Guardians, the Watcher keeps remarking if it's wise to trust Samael and if we're doing the right thing. But war carries on regardless, determined to prove his innocence, even striking deals with demons in the process. But I'll be honest, the whole way through this game I didn't quite trust anybody we'd come across, and I always felt pretty uneasy. Not just with Samael, but every character we've interacted with. Just felt like they were all hiding something from war. There's always a twist somewhere along the lines, but I wasn't sure what it was going to be at this point. Either way, we take the third heart back to Samael, and he tells us of the final one he needs, Silithers, the brood mother who collects information from her captives by keeping them alive long enough to tell her everything they know, which War remarks might lead him to gain information about Samael himself. I'll be honest, I found this area pretty tiresome to traverse through, but I did like the look of the place. Looking down we just see an abyss of spider's web, all interlocking the buildings together, with cocoons of what I presume are Silithers' other victims left for all eternity. I couldn't wait to just kill her and get the hell out of the place, but the design was well received. When we do reach Silither, she tells us that the chosen guardians that we've been slaughtering aren't to protect the tower at all, but rather their hearts are used as vessels to house Samael's true power, which he lost when he was sentenced to his eternal prison. War doesn't seem to care and just wants to get this over with in true war fashion, knowing not to trust anyone's word anyway.
I did not come for your counsel, Spider, or your stories.
Once she falls to our blade, we head back to Samael and give him the fourth and final heart, with War confronting the lies he's spun. But Samael can't wait to tell us that now he's so powerful he could suck the marrow from our bones before we drew another breath apparently, which sounds pretty impressive, but even he has a code of honour it seems, as he spares War from this grim fate. I do like the humour sprinkled throughout the Darksiders series, as it just allows a bit of relief from all the fighting and killing.
You're the Nephilim, the one they call Death. How did you get here?
Took a wrong turn.
War reacts as stoic as ever, Samael stating what does it matter, as long as War gets what he was promised, access to the tower, which Samael obliges to, recognising War's quest for vengeance, which he respects, even if it does go against a supposed code of balance that the horsemen are meant to uphold no matter what. But in this case, I'd definitely say it's justified, as War continues his quest, marching towards the portal, the Watcher questioning how he can trust Samael when he's already lied to us, but War just sees the only way forward and steps in regardless, taking us to the Black Throne. Inside the tower, we meet Azrael, the Angel of Death himself, who fears judgment has arrived when he sees War approach. Azrael remarks the same as Abaddon at the start of the game, that the seventh seal has not been broken, so why is War here? War questions what Azrael has to fear from him, with Azrael asking for War's help if he does not intend to kill him. We learn that the Well of Souls that Azrael normally guards is being used to fuel the Destroyer's armies, with Azrael being imprisoned after suffering defeat at the hands of Straga, the demon that killed us at the very start of the game. War wants revenge as much as the Angel does, so War agrees to help free Azrael if he can get a chance at killing Straga. At the start of this video I mentioned that I can't remember ever actually finishing Darksiders, As soon as I got to the Black Throne, I remembered why. The memory came flooding back to me that we have to traverse through a dark, bland and uninspired environment, solving a fair amount of puzzles, going through gauntlets of annoying enemies to then reach a Guardian type boss, and then redirect a beam all the way back to the centre chamber, which we'll have to do not only once, but 3 times, which felt so tedious and mind-numbing. I honestly just couldn't wait for it to end. I openly sighed when I realised what I had to do after the first time, seeing 3 floating blocks around Azrael that I knew would have to be unlocked in much the same way. I don't want to come across as overly negative, and before other Darksiders fans absolutely flame me in the comments, I reminded myself that this game originally came out on the PS3 over a decade ago. Gaming was a lot different back then, and we hadn't had the games that I've played through since. So I get that games weren't developed for nearly remotely as long, and it felt like a game was coming out every week back in the PS3 days. So I'll cut Darksiders some slack in that regard, as I probably dropped it in favour of some of the other gems that were around at that time. I want to be clear that I genuinely love this game, as I even went for the Platinum Trophy, which I'll touch more on later. For now though, rather than talk about the Black Throne's tedium, I use this time to talk about what I think makes Darksiders shine and stand out amongst others in its genre, the art style of its world and characters. We'll start with War, a formidable and imposing figure, embodying the archetype of a powerful and fearsome warrior. The Darksiders prequel comic mentions how the Council struggled to rein War in from his constant wrath that raged within him, even going as far as stabbing Death, his eldest brother, who in retaliation swiftly cuts off his arm. I mean, just looking at Death, I don't think you'd want to piss him off, but anyway. War stands broad and muscular. As I've mentioned previously, his physical presence exuding strength and authority, with an air of arrogance that nobody can best him. His armour is adorned with skulls, menacing faces, and jagged edges of ancient forged metal, resting atop a battle-worn red-hooded cloak, long flowing white hair and glowing blue eyes, piercing through the darkness that mostly shrouds his face. Hoods can add an air of mystery to a character, as we never get to see their face or head in full view, with the parts we can see covered in scars and battle marks, telling stories of countless encounters he's had before. His design is gothic, edgy, and fantastical, all rolled into one, showcasing a blend of themes: deep reds, stone silvers, and hues of gold and bronze enhances the intensity of his unstoppable nature, reinforcing his association with raging wars and the apocalyptic chaos he represents. The overall design reflects a fusion of ancient and supernatural elements, especially when he sits atop Ruin. Ruin being that of a massive and muscular horse, similar to War in that regard, embodying strength and destruction. His saddle mirroring War's armour, establishing a visual connection between the horse and its rider, with hooves of cracked molten rock and a fiery mane and tail, leaving a trail of hellfire behind as they traverse the many landscapes. His skin branded with supernatural ruins emphasise that these two aren't from our world, born and created through otherworldly forces at play. The UI and weapon designs are also a treat to look at, often over-stylised like they've been ripped straight out of a comic book, or something you draw when you were younger. Everything looks completely out of proportion, oversized with flashy colours, skulls, fangs and horns placed everywhere they'll fit. Nothing looks real, but in a fun way. It's hard to explain, but I'm basically trying to say that these kinds of designs just embody the teenage comic book edgy aesthetic. I would like to talk about the angels and demons we run into throughout War's journey, but we'll get to those in the next chapter, as I find the biblical references deserve their own dedicated attention. For now though, we'll return to the story of the game. Having trudged through the dungeon solving each and every puzzle, the plot does start to unravel a little bit, as Azrael unveils what happened 100 years ago when War was sent to Earth. Abaddon, who we saw at the start of the game, plotted to initiate a surprise attack on Hell's forces, resorting to deception, as he knew that Heaven was on the weaker side of this conflict and would eventually fall. So he conspired with Azrael and Ulthane to destroy only 6 of the 7 seals, making Hell believe that the end war was coming, which would prompt them to send their best legions. But Abaddon would be prepared for this and launch a preemptive strike on those that were sent, before Hell had a chance to retaliate. Then they would have Ulthane reforge the seals, making it look like Hell had gone against the Charred Council's will and started a war off their own back, which in turn would make it seem as though Heaven was mankind's saviours from Hell's deception when they eventually defeated Hell's armies, ultimately claiming victory of the 3 kingdoms. If Hell let the Council know of Abaddon's deception, it will be Heaven's word against the Prince of Lies, with Abaddon banking on them choosing his word over theirs, which is a fair point. I mean, you're always going to go for the good side. I do genuinely like this twist, as Heaven has always been portrayed as the quote-unquote good side throughout history. Holy, just and pure, yet they will be the ones to lie and deceive even that of Hell. Although more will be revealed shortly, as we still don't know why war was sent to Earth if the 7th seal was never broken. Azrael then transports us to an ethereal place known as Eden, a place thought to not exist anymore, but Azrael has simply kept it hidden from even the Charred Council, further unravelling the threads of the story, telling us that when Abaddon fell, he came to the Angel of Death seeking guidance after being defeated by Straga. Azrael pointed Abaddon to the Tree of Knowledge to find the answers he sought. War must now also go to the tree to see what he must do in order to put an end to the Destroyer's reign, but there seems to be no way to reach it. Azrael explains that there is, for those who are worthy. Only creatures of light may cross, but war has been around so much darkness, death and chaos that Eden senses his presence as worse than that of a demon. In order to be granted access to the tree, he must face the darkness within him, donning the mask of shadows to confront this dark presence, revealing itself to be our own shadow. We must face ourselves in order to progress. Although a cool idea, Shadow War falls pretty easily, as with all the bosses in this game. I felt like this could have been such an epic fight, Shadow War using all of our own abilities against us, a real fight to the death kind of battle, but it was over way too soon. With that being said, with our Shadow now defeated, we can continue on to the Tree of Knowledge. Azrael tells us he'll stay behind with the Watcher, who is quick to point out that wherever war goes, he goes. Azrael says he's more than welcome to try, but he'll never make it across the threshold due to the darkness within him. I quite like this area of the game. I know it's short, but it just feels so tranquil sort of thing. Approaching the tree was such a spectacle to behold, and as we enter the light, the truth is revealed to us, but only partially. We see a few brief scenes showing Abaddon at the beginning of the game, confused as to how Hell had prepared so well and knew what he was plotting. A mysterious woman's voice is heard, saying she simply took advantage of his initiative to bring Hell to Earth earlier than expected, so somehow she caught wind of his schemes. She uses this information against him to offer that he join her and take up the mantle of the Destroyer. He refuses initially, but she says he's basically damned either way for what he's done, so gives him an ultimatum: serve in heaven or rule in hell, to which he chooses the latter and becomes the Destroyer. Before all this happened, the Charred Council also found out what Abaddon was plotting, saying he must be punished for going against them, but they have no proof of what he's done or who he's conspired with, as the seals are still intact after Ulthane reforged them. But the sheer fact that he's gone against them in the first place shows that their pact between the 3 kingdoms is no longer as sacred as they thought. They worry that this makes them look weak and they'll eventually be overthrown. But they know they can't defeat Abaddon. They can't send the 4 horsemen without proof, as they're only meant to be called upon once all 7 seals have been broken, and would never agree to be the Council's executioners due to their honour of balance that they swore to. So, unfortunately for War, they decide to send War alone, knowing that with his inevitable defeat without the other horsemen, his quest for vengeance will see that he eventually destroys all the conspirators, wiping out any evidence of Abaddon's treachery, thus leaving the council's reputation intact. We then see a glimpse of the Watcher telling War that he must have known that his exile was a one-way ticket, and then a blade is run straight through his back. Cutting to a void where we see that very same blade jutting out from our own corpse. We grab the sword, but when we awaken, we only have the hilt of the sword within our grasp. We return to Azrael and the Watcher and explain that Abaddon is the Destroyer, simply a pawn in some greater game at play. Azrael asks if we saw any clues how to stop him, and we tell him of a sword that broke the seals, to which he tells us is the Armageddon blade, but Abaddon ordered it destroyed after the seals were broken. War says it will have to be made again. The Watcher curiously asks what else he saw, but War says he saw nothing else. With this information, we leave Eden to find the pieces of the blade that have been scattered across the realm. Azrael tells us that once we have all the pieces, Ulthane can reforge the blade, leading to us finally seeking our revenge. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse are such a fascinating idea to base a game around. Now, I'm not religious in the slightest, to be honest, but even so, I recognise the biblical themes and iconic names of characters that are interwoven throughout Darksiders. I know that it takes liberties here and there, tweaking certain aspects to work it into an actual game, but I still love the representations of the Four Horsemen, presented as the most powerful entities throughout the forces of both heaven and hell, and all the angels and demons that reside within each realm. For these four to have the combined might to instill fear into so many, each legion knowing that if they don't maintain a balance of sorts between each other, they'll have to face the wrath and judgment of war, death, fury, and strife, all taking up their mounts when the time calls. My understanding of the original text is that only death was actually named. The rest were described with what colour horse they rode, what they had in their hands, and what task they carried out. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. It's quite fitting that the one atop the red horse be named War, as what's an event that would take peace from earth but that of war and conflict. In some translations, such as this one, the colour of the red horse is specifically a fiery red one, which ruin indeed represents. The stories of heaven and hell are a tale as old as time. Angels above and demons below. The angels of the game are often clad in elegant and ornate attire. Gold, silver, blues and whites, all reflecting their divine, pure nature. Intricate patterns and flowing garments contribute to their appearance, emphasising their purity with light and heaven itself. Various names of the characters we meet are those of religious figures. We'll start with Azrael, the Archangel of Death, welcoming souls of the dead to the afterlife. Even in game we help to redirect souls back to him. War mentioning that Azrael is steward of the underworld, watcher of the well of souls. Uriel we face a few times throughout the story. In this case she is female, whereas generally Uriel is an archangel referred to in religious texts as male. Uriel means God is my light, or fire of God, known as the Angel of Wisdom, providing guidance and resolving conflicts, with Uriel in game being a captain of the Hell Guard, leading heaven's forces against the demons on earth. Okay, look, the sheer fact that I actively researched which Bible was the best translation to read. In my case, I chose the New International Version, as according to Cambridge University, its watchword is balance, which seems rather fitting for this game. And also, what each angel's name meant just goes to show how this game is so fucking interesting when you go down the rabbit hole. I'd never even read a single line of the Bible before I made this video. And now I feel like I could recite the entire book of Revelation and point out each and every reference that you could argue correlates with Darksiders in some way, shape or form. Anyway, back to Uriel and the angels' designs in general. I like their mechanical armour aesthetic mixed with organic feathers for wings. The blend of the two makes sense, both agility and resilience, allowing their wings to fly freely but protecting their bodies from harm. The wings of an angel are its most noticeable feature and should be displayed proudly and gracefully. Uriel in particular has a form-fitting battle dress, but still covering all areas of her body. The tops of her wings show many battle scars from skirmishes with demons. We don't have any scantily clad armour here, which I think would cheapen the feel of Darksiders. Azrael's design reflects that of high class, wearing robes rather than armour. His halo forged from a combination of metals, almost like a crown in a way, with a typical depiction of a female angel sewn into his breast. Wings that arc downwards, with elongated feathers draping across the ground, like that of a fallen angel, one tainted with darkness. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, that is, destroyer. Abaddon, as a figure in religious writings, is open to interpretation. We could go really deep here, as I did when researching this, but I'm not overly confident in reciting others' words or thoughts. But I genuinely found it interesting that they revolved the game around religious figures and themes. I like how his design reflects his rank of a military leader, pose of a great beast draped over his shoulders that he bested. Perhaps how he lost his eye, with a combination of armour for battle, but robes that would suit a more formal occasion for addressing his status as a high-ranking officer. Samael is another who we'll briefly touch on, as I enjoyed the interactions with him, and honestly was disappointed that, spoiler alert, we never got to actually fight him. I was convinced we'd end up doing so, as it seemed to be built up throughout our journey just how powerful he is, and I was sensing a double cross coming somewhere along the line. But alas, he kept his word, even though he parts with telling us he'll be sure we meet again. Samael, according to traditions, is the king of all demons and the husband of Lilith, who is the mysterious female voice we hear talking to Abaddon according to the Darksiders wiki. In some texts, he's portrayed as not necessarily evil, since his actions are sometimes regarded as resulting in good, which again contrasts with his in-game persona, as he does help us on our journey, even if it's ultimately for his own gain. His wings are inverted, as if reversed and twisted, a fallen angel perhaps. I could go on here, but with our history lesson now over, I'll get back to the actual game. On our journey to find the Armageddon Blade pieces, I also used that time to mop up any last collectibles I'd perhaps missed and uncover all the hidden secrets that had eluded me up until now. Some of them couldn't actually be accessed until we had the relevant equipment and could backtrack to previously inaccessible areas. I do enjoy all the little secrets and Easter eggs they place into games, although they used to feel more prevalent in previous generations. I don't know if it's perhaps that developers just don't have the time anymore to dedicate to creating something that many players might never even see, so they use that time in creating content that won't be missed. It feels like modern games can be extremely hand-holdy, constantly steering you towards where you need to go and what to do, as they don't want you to get stuck on something and ultimately drop the game, even though that used to be part of the fun, having to figure it out for yourself before the internet was even a thing, so you couldn't just look up a guide, which, I'll admit, I did myself when I decided to go for the Platinum Trophy. I doubt I'd have ever found some of the secrets naturally, like Wicked Killington, or Wicked K as he's more commonly known. If we look at the minimap here, we can see that one of these coffins is actually a different shade of grey to the others, which again, only a keen-eyed player would spot and think to go over and check for why. We realise we can actually move it, and as we descend the stairs we are greeted with a well-spoken, top-hat-wearing fellow holding a walking cane. I always laugh how British people are often referred to as some posh, well-spoken, noble breed of humans. Perhaps at one time, I can assure you we aren't. Although tea is a fine drink, ladies and gentlemen. But back to Wicked K, we can find and fight him multiple times in hidden away areas of the game, often greeting us rather politely actually, being a pretty adept adversary, blocking most of our attacks and needing a bit of patience as he fences with us.
Terribly sorry, but I'll have to kill you now.
Each time we best him, we gain a fair amount of souls as he bows gracefully and exits the arena. I love how his design is just a basic reanimated corpse, similar to the basic fodder enemies that we can kill with one hit at the start of the game, expecting him to be a pushover in battle. We'll see more of Wicked K throughout the series, but for now, he announces his departure.
Well played, old friend.
I love little in-game jokes like this. I feel like the developers would have genuinely been having fun putting him into the game. Some areas we have to destroy a set number of fire hydrants or cross-shaped gravestones to unveil a hidden chest, which again, unless you are actively trying to destroy everything, it'd be so easy to miss. It takes a lot for me to want to achieve a platinum trophy. I have to genuinely love playing the game. Otherwise, it just feels grindy and I don't really enjoy myself. But Darksiders was a game deserving of my time and attention, and so I actively went out of my way to discover everything. I felt like this was fitting for war, as he was leading up to the final battle with the Destroyer, in which case he would actively prepare himself, ensuring he was at his peak strength and condition before facing the one who wronged him all those years ago. This included finding all of the abyssal armour pieces, making him look even more fucking badass than he already did. War has always been an imposing figure in his basic attire, but I couldn't help but imagine the 4 horsemen in their abyssal armour sets riding down to rain judgment on the legions of heaven and hell, knowing the force to be reckoned with that they are. I know the whole game is fictional and overly stylised, but even so, I felt like War's abyssal armour stood out amongst everything else, like he was from another plane of existence, a cosmic level of power that the entire universe itself would shudder at just the thought of. As we approach the last piece of the Armageddon blade, we come up against Uriel once again, where she announces a next sacramentum, a sort of death oath, if you will, where one must kill the other to fulfill the oath. War accepts and we have our next boss battle. By this point in the game, I was pretty overpowered, so she goes down without too much effort.
Yes! What are you waiting for? Harvest this wench! Don't you dare walk away from me!
The next sacramentum is mine. I decide when the angel dies, not you.
I don't know why, but I genuinely chuckled at the watcher calling Uriel a wench, like she's not even worth our time. But either way, War leaves her be for now, and states he'll decide when the angel dies, not the watcher. He then tells Uriel that Abaddon is the destroyer, and to remember the death oath, as soon it must be fulfilled. With the last piece of the blade in hand, we return to Ulthane, so he can reforge the weapon and we can finally slay the destroyer. We reach the battleground, where Uriel and her Hellguard have fallen, but War now finally has his chance. The final boss fight is pretty epic, as we need to ride Ruin for the first phase, knocking the destroyer off balance to then get a few hits in while he's grounded. Eventually, we deliver a blow which will have him change back into Abaddon, which has a few QTs to get through, and the usual hit when we can, dodge and repeat. The next cutscene feels so fucking earned after everything we've had to deal with.
It is not for duty that I kill you now.
You can sense War's rage when he rips Abaddon's wings off, Uriel remarking that he must reap what he has sown. With War finally ending him, the seventh seal falls from his grasp, but the Watcher then swiftly appears to remind War once again who holds the leash. He tells him that War's done exactly what the Council wanted him to do, executing everyone who stood in their way because of his thirst for vengeance. But War chuckles, and it's revealed to us what the Tree of Knowledge showed him. This is way more satisfying to watch, so here you go.
That's so damn funny. Even you wouldn't laugh at your own funeral.
I'm laughing at yours.
Next sacramentum. The death oath is complete.
Hell God, bitch! What did you do? No! I'm going to pull your guts out through your halo! Keep getting up. I'll just kill you again. I was just following orders, like you. What are you going to do? Fight the Council? Fight everyone? You'll never get away. You hear me? Never! Don't forget who holds the leash.
I haven't forgotten.
You knew what would happen here, what I would do. That's why you spared me.
No.
Then why?
Because I would not have the last of Heaven's honor die with its champion.
All debts are repaid. The duty I uphold, it may call me to raise my sword against you. And if that day comes, I won't hesitate. You will be hunted. The White City for certain. The Council, and there will be others. You would wage this war alone?
No. Not alone.
What a treat of an ending. War's laugh knowing what is about to happen, the satisfying intimidation and pop of the Watcher's head, War giving Uriel her dues as now newly appointed leader of Heaven. The other horsemen finally arrived to help their brother, now all the seals have been broken. He had to wage this war alone, which he did manage, to be fair to him, but now it's the four against the world, although I doubt anyone stands a chance. Darksiders is its own game, even though it takes various elements from others. You could call it an imitation or a clone, but I feel like there is nothing quite like it. I've gushed about it enough throughout this video, but the art style is just genuinely satisfying to look at. It's sharp, stylish, and I've tried not to say it too much throughout, but it's just cool. I enjoyed the characters, the biblical themes, and I felt like the story wasn't half bad either. I first played Darksiders back in 2010 on the PS3, and now I finally closed its chapter in 2024 on the PlayStation 5. Having obtained the Platinum Trophy, I feel like I can now move on from it. I feel like I've seen all the game has to offer, and I'm glad that I eventually went back to finish it. It's scary to think how fast time is constantly flowing, with so many more games to play through and talk about, including just the ones in this franchise, with our next adventure beginning with death. But that's for another time. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it, and I just want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.